There is a secret, a hidden law that once you know how to use it, can completely change the way money flows through your life. Something deep, operating on a level most people never think to look. Imagine this: every time you make a payment, every bill you settle, instead of feeling a weight, you feel a release, a kind of activation, as though something is set into motion. And here is the question underneath all of it: why does that happen naturally for some, while for others, every expense feels like one more hole in the bucket? Most of us were taught to look at spending through the lens of loss. According to what Florence Scovel Shinn wrote, that is exactly where the block begins. The quiet resentment. The feeling of I am losing money. That is what keeps it from returning. But what if that could be reversed? Florence was clear about this. Money sent with resistance does not return the same way. Money sent with a different energy, with intention, with words aligned to what she called a law, moves the way an instruction moves. It is about seeing every payment, however small, not as an exit, but as part of a larger movement. The tide pulls back from the shore, and for a moment, the beach looks emptier. But the water never disappeared. It is simply following a rhythm larger than what you can see in that moment. And what's most striking is that this law is not concerned with the amount. It is concerned with the energy and the word you put into motion. As though every bill that leaves your hand were a messenger carrying a divine order to bring back even more. You are about to discover that every expense is, in truth, a divine investment waiting to be activated. It is the secret that can transform your entire experience with money, once and for all. You did not invent the feeling in your chest when a payment leaves your account. You inherited it. Somewhere, long before you understood what money even was, you learned to watch it the way you watch something being taken from you. A parent's voice tightening at the sound of the mail arriving, a silence at the dinner table when a bill was mentioned. Money, in those early moments, was never just paper. It was tension wearing the shape of numbers. And so you learned the lie without ever being told it directly. When money leaves me, I have less. Not less money, less safety, less ground beneath you. It sounds obvious enough to dismiss. Of course, a bill paid means a smaller balance. That part is arithmetic, and no law changes arithmetic. But underneath the number, something else happens. A contraction. A private, wordless I am losing. You feel it when the banking app updates. You feel it in the half second before you tap confirm. You feel it even paying for something you wanted, something you chose, as if wanting it doesn't cancel the old alarm underneath. Watch how far this reaches. It's there at the grocery checkout, in the small calculation that runs before the total even appears. Did I need all of this? It's there when a subscription renews without warning, and the feeling isn't really about the amount. It's about that sudden sense that life has taken something from you before you are ready. And it's there in the quieter moment too, the one you don't talk about. Standing at a register, watching a card get declined, and feeling it land somewhere deeper than the transaction. Not the card failed. I failed. Florence Scovel Shinn named this directly in her writing. Fear is the one force that blocks the good we are trying to bring in, not the payment itself, the fear wrapped around it. And fear, once it becomes a habit, stops announcing itself. It just sits quietly under every transaction, disguised as caution, as responsibility, as being realistic about money. You call it practical. It calls itself something else entirely. Think of how many times you've checked a balance not to plan, but to brace. How many times you've opened an app already flinching, already rehearsing disappointment before the number even loads. That isn't simply financial caution. It's an old fear rehearsing itself. This is the part almost no one questions. What if the tightening isn't protecting you at all? What if it's the very thing keeping the door from opening? Because here is what that old belief never tells you. It was never proof of anything. It was only ever a habit of attention, pointed at loss instead of motion. You were taught to flinch at the outflow. No one taught you there was another way to stand there. And a habit of attention can be changed. Watch the shoreline for a few minutes, and something strange begins to happen. The tide goes out. It doesn't leave in a straight line, and it doesn't leave all at once. It pulls back slowly, uncovering sand that was underwater only minutes before. Shells appear, small pools form in the hollows. Rocks that were hidden reveal themselves, dark and glistening, as if surfacing for air. For a moment, the shoreline looks wider, emptier, as if something has been taken from it. If you didn't know better, you might think the ocean was disappearing. But stand there a little longer, because the tide always comes back in. Not because you called it back, not because you stood at the water's edge begging it to return, or because you ran after it demanding it turn around. It comes back on its own timing, following a rhythm that was set in motion long before you arrived at that beach. A rhythm that doesn't consult your worry, or your watch, or how convincing your fear sounds in the meantime. Fishermen understand this rhythm without needing to explain it. They don't panic when the water retreats. They simply know the boats will float again by evening. Children building sandcastles near the water's edge don't grieve when the tide pulls their moat dry. They build, wait, and watch the water find its way back to them, exactly as it always does. This is the part most people miss about the tide. It was never actually leaving. It was completing a motion that had already begun. The going out and the coming in are not two separate events. They are one single movement, and you are only ever seeing half of it at a time. Now think about the last time money left your hands. The rent that cleared on the first, the bill that came due, the transfer you made without wanting to. In that moment, it probably looked the way the shoreline looks at low tide, bare, uncovered, smaller than before. But what if that was never the whole picture? What if, exactly like the water, it was only the half of the motion you happened to be standing close enough to see? Florence Scovel Shinn wrote about a divine supply that is constant, moving, and unlimited. A supply that does not run dry simply because some of it has passed through your hands. Not because money magically refuses to run out, because the source it draws from was never the balance in your account to begin with. Consider, too, that no one stands at low tide trying to hold the water in place with their hands. No one grabs at the retreating waves, insisting they stay. That would be exhausting, and worse, it would miss the entire point of how a tide works. And yet this is exactly what fear asks you to do with money. To grip it, to resent its leaving, to treat every outflow as a small betrayal instead of a rhythm. The tide does not panic at low water. It doesn't rush the return. It doesn't fight the going out. And it doesn't treat the exposed shoreline as evidence that the ocean has abandoned it. It simply moves according to a rhythm larger than the part it can see. That is the exact posture this video is going to teach you to practice with money. You will still pay the bill. You will still see the number leave your account. You will still make practical decisions about what you can and cannot afford. But you can stop making the moment of payment mean that your supply has disappeared. You can learn to release money without attaching fear to its departure. Because the tide does not need to be forced. It needs to be trusted. Perhaps this is where money becomes difficult. We can watch the tide move away and understand, without needing convincing, that it is still part of the ocean. Nobody stands on the shore mourning the water. Nobody checks the tide charts with dread. We simply know, somewhere underneath thought, that the sea does not become less whole because part of it has receded. But when money leaves our own hands, we rarely give it the same interpretation. Why is that? Why do we trust the movement of the ocean so easily and question the movement of money the moment it leaves us? Perhaps because the ocean has never asked anything of us. We were never taught to survive by managing it, negotiating with it, keeping careful records of what it owed us in return. Money, on the other hand, arrived early in our lives already tangled with survival, with whether there would be enough, whether we were safe, whether someone we depended on would still be able to provide. The tide was always someone else's rhythm to observe. Money became the rhythm we thought we had to control. And so we developed a habit the ocean never asked us to develop, the habit of interpreting every outflow as a threat rather than as motion. And this habit rarely looks like fear from the outside. Most often, it looks like responsibility, It looks like checking the balance again, even though nothing has changed since the last time you checked it an hour ago. It looks like pausing before every purchase, running the calculation twice, 3 times, even for something small. Not because the math is difficult, but because some part of you is bracing for a verdict. It looks like the quiet guilt that follows spending, even on something needed, even on something planned. It looks like having enough, clearly, provably enough, and still waiting for the moment it won't be. None of this feels like fear while it's happening. It feels like being careful. Notice, too, how this habit moves in both directions. Money arrives, and before it has even settled, some part of you is already calculating what it will cover, what it will cost, what will be left once it's gone. Money leaves, and immediately the mind reaches forward to what might be needed next, what might run short, what might go wrong. There is rarely a moment in between, a moment where money simply is, and you are simply present with it. The mind is always one step ahead, bracing for the next outflow before the last one is finished. This is not the same thing as prudence, and it matters to name the difference clearly. Prudence looks at what is there and makes a decision. Fear looks at what is there and suffers in advance, long before any decision needs to be made. One is a practical response to numbers. The other is a rehearsal of loss that hasn't happened yet, and in most cases never will. This is worth sitting with for a moment because it changes what the rest of this video is actually about. It is not really about bills or debt or how much is in an account. It is about which of these two postures you have been unconsciously practicing, the posture of the shoreline or the posture of the fist. Florence Scovel Shinn wrote of divine supply as something already whole, already moving, already provided for. Not something to be anxiously protected, but something to be trusted the way you already trust the sea. It helps to be precise about what that actually means, because it is easy to hear divine supply and quietly translate it into the numbers sitting in a bank account. But a balance is only ever what is currently visible, a single frame taken from a much longer motion. Divine supply, as Florence wrote of it, is not the frame, it is the motion itself. It is the source the balance is drawn from, not the balance itself. This distinction matters more than it first appears. A balance can shrink, it can even become frighteningly small. But the source Florence pointed to was never described as being limited to the number in front of you. The question this video is really asking is simple, even if the answer takes practice. What would it mean to meet your own outflow of money the same way you meet the tide? Simply recognizing it as part of a larger motion and learning to release it with trust instead of fear. A bill can leave your account in a few seconds. The fear attached to it can stay with you for hours. Florence Scovel Shinn understood this difference. She never taught her students to fight their circumstances into submission. What she taught instead sounds almost too simple to be called a law. Resistance is what holds a problem in place, not the problem itself. The struggle against it. She wrote of a law of non-resistance, the understanding that whatever you resist, you strengthen. Push against a debt with dread, and the dread doesn't shrink the debt. It only wraps tighter around it. Fight a bill with resentment, and the resentment doesn't make the bill smaller. It simply adds a second weight on top of the first, the number, and now the feeling clenched around the number. Money makes this law harder to practice than almost anything else because money was never just money to begin with. It carries security inside it, future inside it. Whether you can keep a roof, keep a promise, keep the people you love provided for. So when a bill arrives, it rarely arrives alone. It arrives dragging every fear you've ever attached to not having enough. This is not a small distinction. It changes what is actually being asked of you. Florence didn't ask her students to feel differently about money by forcing a smile over fear. Non-resistance was never about pretending the bill wasn't real. The bill still existed. The amount was still accurate. The money still needed to leave your hands. What changed was never the arithmetic, it was the relationship to the arithmetic. There is a difference, she would say, between paying and resisting the payment. Paying sounds like, this is due, I will take care of it. Resisting sounds like something else entirely. There goes my money again, or I can't keep doing this, or the quiet, panicked, what if there's nothing left after this. Both may end in the same transaction, Only one of them ends there peacefully. Watch how precisely you can locate the moment resistance enters. It's there when the notification appears on your phone before you've even opened it. It's there in the half second of hesitation before you tap to view the amount. It's there again sharper right before you click confirm. And once more quieter when you glance at what the balance became afterward. The bill is real. The feeling is real too. But they are not the same thing. One is the payment itself. The other is the meaning and fear you have wrapped around it. This is where the shoreline returns quietly as something more than a picture. The tide does not fight its own retreat. It does not resist the moment of going out, bracing against it, trying to hold itself in place at the shore. It moves the way it was always going to move without opposing its own motion. And this, Florence would say, is exactly what is being asked of you when a payment leaves your hands. Not forced positivity, not pretending the number away. Something closer to letting the motion complete itself instead of standing in its way. And this is where the law of non-resistance begins to change the way you think about money leaving your hands. When a payment is released without the weight of fear around it, you are no longer closing the moment in anticipation of lack. You are leaving yourself open to what comes next. Resistance keeps a hand closed around what has already left. Non-resistance opens it and allows the movement to continue. It's the 14th of the month, and the rent is due tomorrow. You've known this for weeks. It's not a surprise. And still, the moment you open the banking app to transfer it, something in your shoulders rises toward your ears before you've even seen the number. You watch the balance before the transfer, then you watch it after. The difference between those two numbers is exactly what you expected. Nothing about it is wrong. Nothing about it is unfair. And yet you sit there for a moment afterward, phone still in your hand, running a familiar calculation. If this happened again next month, and then the month after that, and then... You stop yourself. You've done this before. You know where the thought goes if you let it keep walking. Here is what's easy to miss in a moment like that. The rent didn't do this to you. The rent was one transaction, completed in under a second. What followed? The tightening chest, the mental spiral into every future month you haven't lived yet, was something layered onto the transaction, the way resistance can build around a bill. You could have closed the app the moment the transfer went through. Instead, you stayed with the number, turning it over, letting it become evidence for a story about scarcity that the number itself never told. This happens in smaller moments too, not just the large ones. The grocery total that comes out higher than you expected, and the quiet automatic "I need to be more careful" that follows. Not said calmly as a plan, but said the way you'd scold yourself for something. The subscription that renews and pulls a number you'd forgotten was coming, and the small flash of "what else am I not tracking?" Even the coffee you buy on a Tuesday morning, ordinary and small, sometimes followed by a flicker of guilt that has nothing to do with the price of the coffee, and everything to do with an old belief that spending, any spending, is proof of carelessness. None of these moments are about the amounts. A $5 coffee and a rent payment can trigger the exact same tightening because the tightening was never calibrated to the number. It was calibrated to an old general belief that money leaving means something is going wrong. Now imagine the same 14th of the month, played differently. The notification still comes. The amount is still exactly the same. You still open the app, still watch the number leave, still see the balance settle into its new total. But this time, instead of grabbing the moment and interrogating it, you let it be what it actually is, a single, ordinary motion. Money moving from one place to the place it was always going to go, the way water moves out from a shoreline that has done this every day of its existence. You could even go one step further, though it may feel unfamiliar at first. As the number leaves, instead of watching it with suspicion, you could meet the moment with something closer to gratitude. Not forced, not performed, just a quiet acknowledgement that this money is doing exactly what it was meant to do. It is covering shelter. It is keeping a promise you made to a landlord, a lender, a life you are building. The money has not failed you. It is fulfilling its purpose. That is money in motion. And this matters even when you don't particularly enjoy the expense. You don't have to love the bill. You don't have to pretend the price is insignificant. You only have to stop turning the act of paying into a personal warning about your future. The money can leave without taking your sense of safety with it. You close the app. Nothing catastrophic happens. The absence of spiraling doesn't cause anything to go wrong. It simply frees the next 20 minutes of your life from a story that was never asked for. This is not a different rent payment. It's the same one met by a different posture. And that difference, small, private, invisible to anyone else, is exactly where this law begins to do its work. Before going further, something needs to be said clearly, because a video like this can easily be misread. None of what you've heard so far means your financial situation isn't real. It doesn't mean the bill isn't due, or that the number in your account is somehow imaginary, or that concern about money is a character flaw to be meditated away. Your circumstances are your circumstances. They deserve honest attention without turning them into evidence of a frightening future. What this video is addressing is something more specific, not the numbers themselves, but the pattern of thought layered on top of them. There is a difference between looking clearly at what you owe and spiraling into what it means about your worth, your future, your safety. One is information. The other is a story the mind tells, often on repeat, usually without your permission. You can hold both of these at once. You can take a bill seriously, pay attention to due dates, make a plan, adjust what needs adjusting, and still refuse to let the paying of it become an occasion for panic. Practical action and non-resistance were never opposites. Florence Scovel Shinn did not teach her students to stop budgeting, stop planning, stop being responsible with what came through their hands. She taught them to stop attaching fear to the responsible things they were already doing. Trusting the process does not mean ignoring the process. If a bill is overdue, address it. If a budget needs adjusting, adjust it. If a conversation about money needs to happen with someone in your life, have it. None of that contradicts anything you've heard so far. What changes is not whether you take action. What changes is whether that action is taken from a place of grounded response or from a place of quiet, low-grade dread that colors everything else in your day. The bill is the reality. The spiral is the pattern. This video was never asking you to dissolve the first, only the second. When money leaves your hands, your first instinct may be to hold on to it emotionally. Florence Scovel Shinn taught something very different. She taught her students to bless the money as it went. Instead of quietly resenting it or silently apologizing for spending it, bless it, the way you might bless a meal before eating or bless a family member setting off on a journey. A word, spoken deliberately, over something in motion. It sounds like a small gesture. It is not a small gesture. Florence wrote extensively about the power carried inside a spoken word, that words are not simply descriptions of what is happening, but instructions that shape what continues to happen. A word spoken in fear plants fear into the moment. A word spoken in blessing plants something else entirely. Here is what this looks like in practice, stripped of anything mystical or complicated. When a payment leaves your hands, the rent, the bill, the transfer you didn't especially want to make, instead of releasing it in silence or worse in dread, you meet it with a sentence. Not a long one, not a performance, something simple spoken inwardly or aloud, depending on where you are and what feels natural. I bless this payment. I release it in peace, and I trust that supply is always moving. Or, if that phrasing doesn't sit naturally in your voice, something closer to your own, I release this money in peace, and I trust the flow of divine supply. The specific words matter less than the posture behind them. What matters is that you are no longer treating the moment of payment as a small loss to be endured. You are treating it as a deliberate act, an instruction sent out with intention, rather than a wound absorbed in silence. This is where the debt collector, the overdue notice, the uncomfortable phone call about money owed, finally has a place in this teaching. Because if blessing works on a rent payment, it is not exempt from working on the hardest version of this, the payment made with the most resistance attached to it. Picture the moment a collection call comes through, or a reminder email arrives with a tone sharper than the others. The old pattern says, brace, resent, feel small, feel accused. The practice Florence taught asks for something almost unreasonable by comparison: to bless the payment as it is made, to bless the resolution of the matter, even to bless the person on the other end of that call. Not because the debt is comfortable, not because you owe anyone warmth they haven't earned, but because resentment, directed at a bill or at the person collecting it, keeps you tied to the exact energy Florence identified as the block in the first place. Blessing does not mean approval of the situation. It means release from the grip it has on you. This is also where something shifts, quietly, in how an expense is experienced. Money released this way stops behaving in your mind like water disappearing into sand, never to be seen again. It behaves more like the tide, moving out with a rhythm, trusted to move back in on its own timing, never truly gone, only completing its motion. This is the moment this video promised at the very start, the moment an ordinary expense becomes something closer to an investment, not because the amount changes, but because your relationship to its departure does. The bill still needs to be paid. The number still leaves. Nothing about the arithmetic changes. What changes is the sentence you place over it on the way out the door. Let's do this together, right now. Find a moment of stillness. You don't need to close your eyes if you're driving or walking, but if you can, let your shoulders drop from wherever they've been holding tension. Think of a payment. It doesn't need to be dramatic. It can be the last bill you paid, or one still sitting ahead of you, waiting for its due date. Let it come into focus. The amount, the account it left from, the reason it existed in the first place. Notice, honestly, what happens in your body when you bring that number to mind. A tightening in the chest, a held breath, a flicker of the old familiar story. There goes my money. You don't need to fight this reaction or judge yourself for having it. It's simply the pattern showing up exactly where you'd expect to find it. Now, instead of pushing the feeling away, answer it with a sentence. Say it silently or aloud if you're somewhere you can. I release this money in peace. Let that settle for a moment before continuing. I bless it as it goes, and I trust the flow of divine supply. Notice what that second sentence is actually doing. It isn't asking you to feel differently through force. It isn't demanding relief on command. It's simply redirecting the moment from a private verdict about lack toward an acknowledgement of motion. The money is not vanishing. It's moving, the way the tide moves, out toward a shore you can't currently see from where you're standing. If it helps to make this concrete, picture the transaction itself as water. Picture the number leaving your account the way water pulls back from the sand, visibly retreating and yet still entirely part of the ocean it came from. Nothing about that water has stopped existing simply because it is, for now, out of view. Say the blessing once more, this time letting it apply to whatever this money accomplished. If it was rent, I bless this payment for the shelter it provides. If it was a bill, I bless this payment for the service it completed. If it was a debt, moving slowly toward its end, I bless this payment for the freedom it is building, one release at a time. And now, you don't need to measure anything. You don't need to decide whether it worked. You don't need to feel peaceful, certain, or different right away. The purpose of this moment was simply to meet the payment differently, to release it without adding another layer of fear to what was already happening. If your body feels lighter, let it be lighter. If nothing feels different yet, let that be true too. You haven't failed the practice. You have simply given your mind a different way to respond the next time the moment comes. And if anxiety is still there, if some part of you interrupts with, but what if this doesn't work? What if the money doesn't come back? What if I'm just talking to myself in an app? Let that voice be there. Don't silence it and don't argue with it. Simply return, gently, to the sentence. I release this money in peace. The mind often resists exactly the ideas that challenge its oldest habits, and resistance to a new practice is not proof that the practice has failed. You do not need to solve every doubt tonight. You only need to plant the sentence and let it sit. This is also worth knowing, especially if you're doing this practice before sleep. The mind continues its work quietly, even after your attention moves elsewhere. You don't have to hold the thought consciously all night for it to matter. A seed planted before sleep doesn't require you to stand guard over it until morning. It simply needs to have been planted. Over time, this becomes less of an exercise and more of a reflex. The sentence arriving on its own right at the moment a payment leaves your hands without needing to be summoned deliberately. That is what a practiced law eventually becomes. Not something you perform, something you simply do. The way the tide doesn't perform its retreat, it simply moves, because moving is what it has always done. Imagine what this practice could look like months from now, woven quietly into an ordinary Tuesday. Picture it. An unexpected expense arrives, the kind that used to derail an entire afternoon. Maybe the car needs a repair you weren't planning for. Maybe a medical bill lands in the mail with a number larger than you'd budgeted. The old pattern would have hijacked the next several hours, replaying the number, calculating what it meant, quietly rehearsing every worst version of what comes next. But this time, something different happens. Almost before you notice it happening, you read the number. You feel the familiar tightening begin, because the tightening doesn't disappear overnight, and no one promised it would. But instead of following that tightening into its usual spiral, you find yourself reaching, almost automatically, for the sentence, "I release this money in peace. I bless it as it goes, and I trust the flow of divine supply." You still call the mechanic, you still compare a few quotes, still make sure you're not overpaying, still do everything a responsible person would do with an unexpected cost. None of that stops. What stops is the additional hour you used to spend afterward, staring at a spreadsheet that wasn't going to change no matter how long you stared at it, mentally rehearsing every future emergency this one might predict. The expense is handled. The evening is yours again. Or picture a smaller version of this, further into the future. A friend asks to borrow money, not a large amount, but enough to notice. The old response might have been a quiet resentment underneath the yes, a private tally kept somewhere in the back of the mind, a small resentment that colors the friendship until the money finds its way back, if it ever does. This time, whatever you decide, you meet the decision without resentment. If you choose to help, you bless the money as it leaves. If you choose not to, you can still make that decision without guilt or fear. The blessing was never about the answer you give. It was about releasing the fear underneath whichever answer is true for you. Even the involuntary losses, the kind no blessing prevents, the parking ticket, the unexpected fee, the subscription you forgot to cancel, the charge you wish you had noticed sooner, even these begin to move through you differently. Not because you've stopped noticing them, because you've stopped letting each one confirm an old story about being someone money slips away from. This is what a practiced law eventually looks like from the outside, unremarkable. No one watching you pay a bill would know anything had changed. The transaction looks identical to the one you made a year ago, but you would know. You would know in the same way you know when you've stopped bracing for something that never used to feel safe, quietly, and then all at once, without being able to name the exact day it happened. The tide never announces when it turns. It simply turns, and the shore, eventually, is full again. Before you go, there is one more thing worth carrying with you. If something in this video found its way to you, the tide, the blessing, the quiet difference between paying and resisting a payment, consider staying close to this channel. These ideas tend to deepen the more they're returned to, the same way a shoreline reveals more of itself the longer you stand there watching it. And if you're willing, leave a word in the comments about which part of this met you today. Perhaps it was the rent payment that used to steal your afternoon. Perhaps it was the debt you've been resenting instead of releasing. Perhaps it was simply the reminder that the tide was never actually leaving, only completing a motion you couldn't yet see the other half of. Naming it, even briefly, tends to make it easier to remember the next time a payment leaves your hands and the old tightening begins. For now, there is nothing more to do. No further steps, no additional practice, nothing to get right before the next payment arrives. You've already planted what needed planting. The next time a payment leaves your hands, remember the tide. You don't have to turn its departure into a prediction about what comes next. Bless it, release it, And remember that you don't have to see the entire movement at once. Until the next video, may you meet what leaves your hands with a little more peace and a little less resistance.